What did I get myself into this time? I'm starting to get used to these bikes in a box. Just a little bit too much. This here is a 2007 Yamaha YZ250F that I was told has a locked up bottom end. And it indeed has a locked up bottom end. But that's not where the problems stop. That's just where they begin. As you can see, she's not really a looker. And definitely needs some cosmetic as well as mechanical love. I got a box of parts, so it's time to walk around this thing, find out what I have, what I don't have, and what needs to be ordered. Stick around. Well, despite looking like it's been left for dead, it's really not that bad. The cosmetics make it look pretty terrible. However, it definitely has been sitting for a little while, and it definitely has a locked up lower end. So the big end bearing is locked up. So this is already bringing question into my mind of whether or not I should go ahead and do my first crankshaft rebuild on this. And that may be the case. However, we need to get these cases split so I can take a look at this crankshaft to make sure it's rebuildable. There is a lot of surface rust on the webs and don't really know what the rest of it's going to look like. So obviously my first course of action is going to be getting this bottom end out of the frame, getting it split, and inventorying what we have. I think before starting to rip this lower end apart, as you can see, I've got another one apart here on the bench. We don't want to mix any parts up, you know what I mean? Which I'm going to do anyway. But I think before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and inventory this box, see what I got with this thing. Piston and cylinder. Our piston has some scoring on the side of it. The rings look super loose. I'll have to measure that. Well, we got a cylinder, but as you can probably see, the Nikasil coating is worn off of it, and this cylinder is not going to be usable for our project. It's obviously a good cylinder candidate to be sent out and have it re-Nikasil coated, but we're not going to do that. I'm just going to replace it. And more than likely, I'm just going to go ahead and put a piston and rings in here with the scoring that's on this. If I had to guess, I would say this piston is probably already undersized anyway. So, exhaust pipe. Definitely bent here in the front. Probably use a little bit of hammer action, straighten that out. Here's a biggie cylinder head. I don't see any damage. I don't see any damage to it, but the valves are out of it. Looks like we got ourselves a set of camshafts. Not bad. They look like they're in pretty good shape. Cam caps. Don't see any damage. Half moon retainers. Tensioner, valve cover, upper motor mount. Oh, here's our valves. Intake. We'll have to check these to see if they're bent or damaged in any way. More valves. Carburetor. Got ourselves a carburetor here. Dried up crusty old hoses to the carburetor. Chain guide. Oil feed tube. Head bolts. Other miscellaneous clamps and bolts, cover for the carburetor, vent tube. Well, I've got 3.029, maybe 0295 or something like that. The spec on this is 3.0297, so if it's in spec, it's just barely and not worth putting back in like this. So just go with a Wiseco kit, and then this thing will be fresh, top and bottom. I was going to reuse this chain, but I think I'm out of chain lube. Heilstein here. I'm going to check and make sure she goes through all the gears. Yeah, everything shifts fine. Woo! I love seeing water come out of the engine. That crankshaft sure did look like it's been sitting outside. All right, let's get this thing opened up and inspect the damage. When you take these off, you got to watch out. There's a spring and a brass pin. see with this timing chain where some of the links are binding. No good. She's rusted in there. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and pull the oil pump out. Let's take a look at that. It's not bad. It's definitely got some water in it, but no scoring. Now it's critical to make sure you get all your bolts out on this crankcase before you start using your crankcase splitter tool. The stress on it could certainly cause some damage to the cases. Crack it, do something. Because this was kind of rusted together, just have to tap it a little bit. Alright, doesn't look too bad. I'm definitely going to have to replace a few bearings in here, which was certainly not unexpected. Well, with the crankshaft, it looks like it's just kind of superficial rust. This ought to clean up, so problem that I'm seeing, looking at the teeth where the cam chain goes, these things are toe up. Just too much wear on it. So looks like we will be putting a crankshaft in this as well, and we'll have to put off my rebuild to a later date. And the transmission looks good as well. This is as far as I'm going to disassemble this. I'm going to stick this whole thing in the parts washer, get it cleaned up. So basically I've got a good idea of what I need, and this one's going to go ahead and be a fixer as well. Well, I'm going to order some parts. That's going to take a little bit of time, but for you guys, it'll be the next clip. Well, it's the next clip, and we got a bunch of new parts for this thing. New set of main bearings for the crankshaft. One of the transmission support bearings was tight. Replace that. New spark plug, gasket set. New Yamaha timing chain. Little C-clip retainers were missing. Got those. Brand new YZ250 piston. Let's look at this thing, because they're always so pretty. It comes with all the accoutrements. Brand new cylinder. Brandy new Pro X crankshaft. Plus some other knickknacks. Tires, chains, sprockets, air filter, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go right through it. Make sure she's a good, reliable bike. But before we do any of that, let's take our crankshaft over, throw her in the freezer. Well, let's start by getting these main bearings and this transmission support bearing replaced. Main bearings are fairly easy. Just flip your case over. Pay attention to your orientation when they come out. On the Yamahas especially, there's a groove. And that's where your retainers sit in that groove. So you want to drive the bearing with the groove facing up. While those bearings are chilling in the freezer, we're going to go ahead and get this support bearing out. This one here is a little more difficult and does require a special tool. So what you're going to need is a blind hole bearing puller. That goes right in the middle. As you tighten it up, it expands, grabs the inside of the race. Bob's your uncle. Now this particular bearing is a little bit tricky because it has a seal on one side, the other side is open. I ordered one from Yamaha and it came open on both sides, which is concerning because the oil travels through your oil tube to this side of the engine, and if this bearing was open it would just dump all the oil back into the case, but because it's sealed it runs oil to your countershaft bearing and also comes out through the center of the transmission to oil your clutch. So if you were to just put a standard bearing in here, you may have trouble with your clutch burning up. And I don't know if I ordered the wrong bearing from Yamaha or whatever, but I've run into this before, so I know better. What I end up doing is picking up a Koyo bearing. This one is double sealed, but we just snatched one of the seals out of it, and it works really well. And it's 60032 Romeo Sierra Charlie 3. I don't know if you can see all that writing, but if not, I'll put it up on the screen. On the seal it says 6003 Romeo Sierra. So we snatched the seal out. We basically have the exact same bearing. Next, to drive the bearing, we'll find a socket that's got the same diameter as the outer race, and we'll send her home. Just want to make sure she's going in straight. Put a little bit of blue Loctite in a red bottle. Do not get any of this Loctite into that bearing. It will absolutely lock that bearing up, even though it's got oil in it. Next, to drive in your new main bearings, just put a little bit of oil on the case. This is highly recommended right here. This is a bearing and seal installer tool. The idea is that it pushes evenly all the way along the outside of the bearing race. You definitely don't want to ever bang on the inside of the race. It could definitely damage it. So right now the bearings are in the freezer. What I'm going to do is get a little bit of heat on my case, not too much. We do that either with a MAP gas, propane torch, oxyacetylene. Just be careful, aluminum will melt super easy. The reason we do the heat and the cool is when things are heated, they expand. When things are cooled, they contract. So it just helps to get these together a little bit easier, especially when you go to slide your crankshaft in. These are peened over from the factory, so I'll go ahead and repeen them. We just oil up all our bearings. And this side of the case is done. Now this side here is a little bit trickier because you got your transmission. Flip this upside down, transmission goes everywhere. So I don't want to break the transmission apart because it's not necessary for me on this particular job. So generally what I will do, throw a rag over it, throw a piece of tape on it, that'll hold it all in place. Put a couple blocks of wood just to space it up. And at this point here, we're ready to drop our crankshaft in. Same thing, we're going to heat our bearing to expand the inner race. The crankshaft's cooling, so it'll shrink. You want to put this with your chain splines facing up. She should fall right in perfectly. As this equalizes, this fit between the bearing and the crankshaft will become much tighter. Don't forget your oil pickup screen. Right here, there is a dowel with an O-ring. Don't forget that. Now, the seal between the two crankcases is just a gasket maker. I like Permatex Ultra Black or Ultra Gray. They work pretty good. Now, you just want to put a very, very light coating on one of the case halves, and then you're going to put it together. The problem, I think, when you do this with your finger, unless you're extremely careful and you put too much, when this squeezes, it will actually squeeze some of this inside of the case, and what ends up happening is, as the oil circulates, this stuff breaks off and it will get down and actually block up your screen. So the preferred way to do this is to use a rubber roller. These things you can get on the Jungle website, fairly inexpensive. It's like $5 or something for 2 of them. It's a hard rubber. And then when you roll it, you'll get the perfect consistency. There is one spot right here that actually needs some, and you could just probably dab some on with your finger there. Then just clean off the excess from where you don't want it. At this point here, you want to make sure your dowels are in the right place. All your seals, everything's lubed up properly. Good deal. She slipped on easily. If it didn't and it wouldn't pull through this bearing, I actually have a crankshaft puller, but I did not need it. At this point here, obviously make sure everything spins freely. It's also a good idea with these Yamahas to go ahead and run them through all the gears. This point here, I went ahead and cleaned the head all up real good, inspected everything, looks good. Organized all the components, cleaned all that stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and reassemble this head, get this thing ready to go, and we'll get this top end together. At this point, went ahead and cleaned everything up, reassembled the head, shimmed out my valves. Now the head's ready to bolt back on, so we'll get this piston and cylinder installed. If you've seen any of my other rebuild videos, you know the next thing I need to do is check my piston ring end gaps. Very important. If the gaps are too tight when the engine actually heats up and these rings expand a little bit, the gaps could actually close out and break, lock the engine up. The specs call for 0.012 inches, which comes out to 0.30 millimeter for the top ring, and 0.015 for the second ring minimum clearance, which comes out to 0.38 millimeter. Being a brand new cylinder and brand new rings, this just barely fits in. I'm going to take a little bit off of this one. And my second ring, .38 millimeter, is way too tight. We need to file these ring gaps and recheck them. After getting your ring gaps filed out properly, follow the instructions that come with your piston. Whether it's a Wiseco or a Pro X or anything, they're going to have their own specific suggestions or requirements, if you will, as to where each ring goes. If you're doing OEM, obviously just follow OEM. And so now what I like to do is I've got one of my circlips in the piston ready to go. What I like to do is get the piston inside the cylinder, just barely started. It makes it a lot easier to get these two to mate rather than trying to fight with it on the connecting rod and everything else. So obviously keep track of which direction is going to be forward. Your piston will generally have an arrow or a dot or a mark of some sort that's going to show you which way points towards the exhaust or the front of the engine. Yamaha is super easy because you have 2 exhaust valves and 3 intake valves, so you already know the orientation of the piston, and we want to continue that orientation. So as we flip this, we're going to flip our piston as well. The biggest concern with these is going to be these oil control rings, because they're super flimsy. If you're pushing this in and one of them rolls out, you may not even notice it, and it will bend back and score up your cylinder. So try to pay attention as best you can. Now at this point here, you'll have clearance to get your wrist pin in. Make sure you have your dowels in and your base gasket, and with Yamaha, make sure you have this coolant tube and the proper O-ring on there before you go any further. So normally if you were building this, the problem you'd have is trying to hold the rings and hold this while it's moving and trying to get the piston on and everything. It's just really a pain. So it's certainly a lot easier just to slide that in. Slide your pin through, and then you can go ahead on this side and put your other clip in. To set your piston on top dead center. Top dead center basically means that the piston's at the topmost travel that it can go before it starts going back in the opposite direction. So when you spin this crankshaft forward, you feel resistance. When it's at the very bottom or bottom dead center, there's a lot of play. It's like super easy to turn the crankshaft. You feel drag as it's coming up, the resistance of the ring scraping against the cylinder. And the same thing, when you get to the top, you can kind of wiggle it back and forth, and there's like a little dead spot there. Feels like super loose. On most of these bikes, if you look at the crankshaft, the keyway will point straight up the engine when the piston is on top dead center. Make sure you use some blue Loctite on any of these internal engine bolts. I've seen the damage that they can do when they come out. Go ahead and throw a zip tie loosely on your timing chain. This way you can maneuver it, let it fall down inside the cylinder right now for putting the head on. Put a little oil on the threads and on the washers of your head bolts. Drop them in and get them torqued. Torque on these main head bolts is 27 foot-pounds. I generally like to do them in 2 steps. So I'll do 14, then go back over and do 27. Starting here, cutting across to the right front, left front, right rear. Go ahead and tighten these up to whatever you feel like. Or 5 foot-pounds, whatever comes first. Alright, we got our cams installed. We're still on top dead center. We can verify that with the screwdriver. You roll it forward and back, the screwdriver jumps up and down. Right in the middle is the sweet spot. Timing mark, timing mark, timing mark. Perfect. At this point, go ahead and make a few full revolutions of the engine. We'll recheck our timing marks. At this point here, we're just going to spin forward on the engine. We don't want to spin back anymore once the timing chain is installed. One thing very important to take note is if you're replacing your crankshaft, the Woodruff key is not going to come with your new crankshaft. So you got to dig this one out there and jam it in the other one. Another very good candidate for some Loctite. We got our motor built top to bottom. Time to get her back in the frame. Well, I went ahead and got the engine back in, buttoned all up. Did a couple other small things like replaced the rear tire, new chain, went through the front brakes and got all that stuff working fine. So unfortunately I had to abandon the project for a little while. I had a couple other things that were needing to get done, but I think it's time to get back on our YZ project. Let's get this together and get it started. We are going to adorn this one with a new set of plastics. If you watch, you know what it is. No ethanol. Carbureted bikes, no ethanol. Alright, we got fuel, oil's topped off, coolant's topped off. Here we go again. No leaks, it's looking good. What's going on? Actually, don't know if we ever checked spark on this thing. That's what we got to do. Check to make sure we got spark. So we got spark, and this thing's got tons of compression. Alright, definitely fuel in the bowl. Got good spark. A little backfire. Topped off the oil, turn the idle up a little bit, turn the needle in a little bit. Well, I gotta say, this thing's got me a little bewildered. I've gone through it over and over again. Compression is fantastic. Passes the leak down test with flying colors like it's brand new. I ohmed out all of the sensors, stator, coil, TPS, neutral safety switch, kill switch. Everything ohms out right. I went ahead and swapped out the CDI and the ignition coil. Same thing. Got great spark, great compression. I pulled the carb, went through that again. Everything looks beautiful in there. Just squirted some fuel right down the old yap there. It's nothing. I've checked cam timing over and over again. I've checked valve clearances over and over again. Starting to think maybe one of the gears is spun on one of the cams, but the back side of the cams actually looks perfect. They're pointing up in 45-degree or 30-degree angles like they should be. I pulled off the flywheel to make sure that the keyway didn't shear off. I threw another flywheel on there just to see if it was any different. I've literally never run into this before. This thing just does not want to start and run. It did start twice for a half a second each. Sounded good when it starts up, but it continually wants to backfire through the exhaust. So I took a night to think about it a little bit. And I think I'm going to go ahead and swap out the carburetor and see if maybe that's part of my problem here. But honestly, I don't really know where to go. Alright, well, I pulled the carb off a Kawasaki project that I'm working on. And we'll throw this on here and see if this makes a difference. I'm also going to throw on one of my kicking boots. Kicker's going right through my shoe. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Very shocked, but I'll take it. So now I need to order a carburetor for this bad boy. That's crazy. I threw a carb I had just laying around over here on it. Let's see if this will work out. sounds like the carb's gonna need a little bit of tweaking with the jets and stuff like that, but whew, man, I'll tell you, and this thing drove me crazy. It was driving me absolutely crazy trying to figure it out. I've never seen an issue with a carburetor so bad that like even squirting a little bit of fuel in the engine wouldn't start it. So I guess we'll play around with this one a little bit and then get it put back together. Well, I'm thinking at this point I'm just going to go ahead and leave this video right here. I definitely want to get something out for you guys for Saturday. I ordered a couple of throttle cables and a couple other things that have to do with the carburetor, and I don't want to put this all together and then have to take it all back apart again. So what I'll do is I'll just leave it here, end this video now, and then I'll put out like an update video when it's all together and we'll be ripping it through the fields. But again, I want to say thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for commenting. Hit that like if you enjoyed this video. And if you hit that bell, it'll tell you when my new videos come out. I usually put them out just about every Saturday if I have the content. But again, I appreciate you guys very much. And we'll see you on the next one.